All right, today we're diving into a source that paints a very, very different picture of the controversial figure Asaram Bapu. The material we're breaking down makes the case that the official story you know is completely wrong and that the charges against him were actually part of a massive conspiracy. Now, our goal here isn't to take sides, but just to clearly explain the arguments as they were presented in this source.
So the entire argument really boils down to this one single question. Is Asaram Bapu being punished because he was trying to stop religious conversions? The source we're looking at believes that his legal troubles weren't random at all, but a direct attack because of his work. This is the central idea we're going to unpack today.
The idea here, according to the source, is that Bapu is stepping on some pretty big toes. His efforts to bring people, especially in tribal areas, back into Hinduism supposedly put him in direct conflict with some very powerful people and interests. The source even claims this work angered key political figures, hinting that a high-level plot was put in motion just to get him out of the picture. Okay, so how do they even begin to build this conspiracy case? Well, it all starts by taking apart the first major conviction against him, the Jodhpur case. According to the source, the sequence of events that kicked this all off is just weird. It starts with a girl getting sick at an ashram. The warden says, oh, it's black magic, and insists that only Bapu can fix it. Then, the warden personally calls the parents. That one phone call starts this incredibly complicated, multi-city trip, and the source just asks, why go through all this trouble? It seems like a very elaborate setup. And this journey, it wasn't a straight shot, not even close. From the ashram in Chinwara, they went back to their home in Shajapur, then all the way to Delhi, only to find out they'd missed Bapu. Then they were told to go to Jodhpur. The source really focuses on this zigzagging path as a huge red flag, basically arguing that if there was some malicious plan, it could have happened way more easily back at that first ashram. The actual location of the alleged incident is another huge point for the source. So picture this. It supposedly happened inside this tiny little hut. But right outside, more than 100 of his followers were gathered for a sermon. The girl's own parents were also right there waiting nearby. The source really questions how a 90-minute incident could possibly happen in such a public space without a single person noticing anything. Now, this is a part the source finds really baffling. When the girl came out of the hut, the only thing she apparently said to her mother was, Bapu is not a good person. And after traveling all over the country for this meeting, you'd think her parents would have immediately demanded to know what happened. But according to this source, they didn't. Instead, they just left and went to a nearby farmhouse, showing no real sense of urgency. All right, let's look at the specific charges, because the source argues they were legally pretty shaky. First, human trafficking. The counter-argument here is simple. How can you call it trafficking when her own parents brought her there willingly? Then there's gang molestation. This charge was used because staff members assisted by setting up the meeting. But the source sees this as a really weak connection, almost like it was just tacked on to make the crime seem more serious. And then there's this, a major contradiction in the timeline, according to the source. The victim's official statement says she didn't tell her parents what happened until days after they got home. But a defense lawyer came forward and claimed the parents actually tried to hire him to file a case the very next day. That discrepancy, the source argues, is a massive hole in the prosecution's entire story. Okay, so that's the Jodhpur case. But next, we get into the second big pillar of the source's argument, the Ahmedabad case. And if they thought the first one had holes, they argued this one is built on practically nothing. 12, that's the number. 12 years passed between when the incident in the Ahmedabad case allegedly happened and when the accusation was finally made. The source finds this huge gap in time incredibly suspicious and asks, why would you wait over a decade to report something so serious? And the problems, according to the source, didn't stop there. The accuser couldn't remember the exact date or even the year it happened. Her story about the timing apparently changed over and over. And, crucially, there was absolutely no physical evidence and no other witnesses. The entire conviction, the source claims, was based on just one person's uncorroborated statement from over a decade ago. But then, the source brings out what it considers its knockout punch. The accuser's own sister allegedly testified against her, saying on the record, "What my sister is saying is a lie." The source argues that this testimony, coming from her own family, should have been enough to raise serious doubts about the whole thing.
So you have to ask, right, if the case was this flimsy and was even contradicted by the accuser's own sister, how on earth did he get convicted? Well, the source's answer is a wild one. It claims the court basically suggested that while this kind of testimony might not be enough to convict an ordinary person, it was accepted because Asaram Bapu was such a famous and powerful figure. The implication is that he was held to a totally different and much lower standard of proof just because of who he was. And this is where the argument really zooms out. It stops being just about one man and becomes a much broader critique of the justice system itself. Specifically, the source claims there's a systemic gender bias in Indian law that needs to be talked about. To make this bigger point, the video brings up a completely separate incident, a case study that it calls Delhi Ka Dorinda, or the Beast of Delhi. This story is laid out as a serious cautionary tale. A woman gets into an argument with a man and then posts his picture online with a false accusation. The Beast of Delhi label goes viral. The guy loses everything: his job, his family, his reputation. And even after he's proven to be completely innocent, the damage is already done. His life is ruined and his accuser faces zero consequences. So what's the point of telling that story? Well, the source uses it to say, see, this is the kind of guilty upon accusation culture that we're living in. They argue that this mindset is exactly what allowed the supposedly weak cases against Asaram Bapu to actually succeed, claiming he was convicted in the court of public opinion long before the trial was over. So for its final argument, the source shifts gears completely. It moves away from all the legal talk and ends with a plea to its audience to remember what it calls Bapu's positive cultural contributions. The video specifically points to two big initiatives he started: Parents' Worship Day on February 14th, pitched as a traditional alternative to Valentine's Day, and Tulsi Worship Day on December 25th, as an alternative to Christmas. The source holds these up as proof of his dedication to preserving Indian culture. And that leaves us right back where we started, with this huge, provocative question: was he a framed spiritual leader or a convicted predator? The source we've just explained makes a very clear case for the former, arguing that the real truth of what happened has been systematically buried. It's a perspective that absolutely challenges the official story.